This is a 7800 XT and it released on September the 6th, 2023 for a US MSRP of $500. And thanks to a new subscriber and Patreon member, RK Benchmarker, I'm able to make this video for you. He bought a reference design. He sent it out to me and said, hey man, take your time with it. No rush on getting it back. He was incredibly generous and patient with me. I was able to do all of the testing you're going to see today. So thank you, RK Benchmarker. I really do appreciate it. It is people like you that give little YouTubers like me a chance on this platform. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Now, today we're looking at the 7800 XT and we're going to go deep on this card. I ran a whole lot of benchmarks, and I mean a lot of benchmarks. So we're going to take a look at the stock settings and how they compare to some overclocking. We're going to take a look at the stock settings and compare it to some undervolting settings. And then we'll take the overclocking settings and talk about the undervolting settings and compare those two. And then talk about what you should probably do if you plan on buying a 7800 XT or if you've already bought a 7800 XT. Now, I've already done a full video on the 7800 XT and comparing it to the 6800 XT from a high level. I talked about the pros and cons of each, and the short version is I think the 7800 XT is more or less a refresh of the 6800 XT. It is a better version of that card. Now, a lot of people don't like that comment because they say, well, that's not technically true. You're talking two different architectures here, RDNA 3 versus RDNA 2. And I understand that. I get that. But when you look at the raw performance of these cards, the 6800 XT, even in ray tracing, is right there with the 7800 XT. And in some cases, I'm assuming thanks to driver maturity, it actually outperforms the 7800 XT. And so from that standpoint, I didn't really understand why so many people were getting excited about the card. Now, on the flip side of it though, if you're going to buy one of the cards today, based on current US pricing on Newegg.com, the 6800 XT is still going for $500. And so if you're going to pay $500 for a GPU right now, I definitely think the 7800 XT is the way to go, because even if the 6800 XT matches it, the 7800 XT is the newer architecture and will get better support over time through driver updates. And so to me, logically, that makes sense. However, if you can buy a 6800 XT for like $350, $400 at the most, then there's a little bit more of an argument to be made there for purchasing a 6800 XT over a 7800 XT. But all in all, I want to talk about the 7800 XT in great detail today. So let's get into it. Every one of these games were ran at 1440p. And the reason why is because I don't think the 7800 XT is a true 4K card. If you want to play games at 4K, you're gonna need more horsepower. And also at the same time, I think the 7800 XT is a little bit too powerful for 1080p gaming. Obviously, you can use the 7800 XT for 1080p gaming. I really think you should shoot for 1440p. I think that is the sweet spot for modern day gaming. And I think this card is perfect for 1440p gaming. All games you see benchmarked today were mostly ran on the maximum graphical settings. And anytime a game was not ran at ultra, you'll see that because the settings will say high instead of ultra. Now on the screen, you can see my test bench with all of the hardware listed. And if you watched my last video, then you'll probably recognize some of these components because I went into greater detail about the test bench while using the Neso P1. Now, it is important to understand that the 7800 XT is rated at 263 watts. And I did confirm this with techpowerup.com, tomshardware.com, and even AMD's official website. Now, for the overclocking settings, I really got lucky here because RK Benchmarker not only sent me this card, but he also sent it to another YouTuber called Game Tech Reviews, and he sent it to him first, and he did a full video on this card as well, and he went through and did a bunch of overclocking and things of that nature. And because we were using literally the exact same card, I was able to just copy all of his overclock settings, and that saved me a bunch of time, so thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'll have a link to his video down below. Now, as a side note, there are other options for overclocking an AMD GPU without necessarily having to spend a lot of time tinkering with settings. The AMD Adrenalin software offers auto overclocking for you and auto undervolting. And so those are definitely options you can use that do work quite well if you don't want to spend the time going back and forth tinkering with settings. And just to be crystal clear here, my settings will not work for you. Everyone's GPU is different. just how everyone's CPU is different. And so if you do want to get your hands dirty, and if you do want to do a manual overclock, you will have to take some time and tinker with the settings and run your own benchmarks to figure out what's stable. This is a dual fan design. It is a reference model. It's not that loud. And even under 100% GPU load for some heavy benchmarks like Cyberpunk, for example, there was no noticeable coil whine. Yes, you could hear the fans ramp up, but guess what? You're going to hear that on any type of GPU. I mean, that's perfectly normal, totally fine. I would not classify the reference model design of the 7800 XT as a loud card or a noisy card by any means at all. And lastly, for undervolting, I did do all of that myself. It took me about an hour or so to tinker and play around with the card. I will have my settings on the screen for you right now so you can see it. It's incredibly important to understand that your 7800 XT will likely be different than my 7800 XT. And so therefore, my settings will not be an identical match for the settings that you should probably use. This is a trial and error process. You need to tinker with your card, set the settings, run some benchmarks, see what's stable and see what isn't. But hey, without any further ado, let's take a look at some of these benchmarks. Starting things off with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, 1440p on the Ultra preset with the in-game benchmark. As you can see, we have stock settings versus overclock settings. Overclock has better 1% lows, better frame rates overall with better averages. And if you're curious about the temperatures, how in the world can an overclock use more power in most situations and actually run colder? It's because when I say stock, I truly mean stock. I changed nothing with the card out of the box, popped it in the test bench and let it run. And this is what it is. But with the overclock settings, because I was actually increasing the power and trying to get more out of the card, I actually put on a custom fan curve. And because of that, as you can see, if you apply a fan curve, the temperatures will get better. And so overall, I definitely in this game can clearly tell you that an overclock is better than stock performance. You see the final results there with a difference of 10 frames per second. Next up, we have Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I ran the in-game benchmark, native 1440p on the Ultra preset. Once again, the custom fan curve with the overclock settings is leading to lower temperatures. Something I cannot quite explain is that the overclock settings are also pulling in less wattage. I don't know how or why that is even possible. I did double check the settings. What you're looking at is in fact accurate. This is the real world behavior of what happened whenever I applied the overclock settings. So I don't quite understand this. But as you can see with the frame rates, we are more or less about the same with stock and the overclock. And so not all games can take an overclock. Some games straight up crash, and other games will accept it and give you 10 FPS better on average. And other games, you don't really notice a big difference. And Assassin's Creed Valhalla clearly seems to be one of those games where there is unfortunately not that big of a difference between stock settings and an overclock. Next up, I have Cyberpunk 2077 native 1440p on the high preset, no ray tracing and no upscaling of any kind. And as you can see, the overclock settings are in fact yielding a little bit better of results overall. We do have slightly better 1% lows and a slightly better overall FPS average. And when you look at the active frame rate where it says FPS, you can see that we are constantly just a little bit higher than stock settings. Once again, our temperatures are lower thanks to that custom fan curve. However, we actually see more power draw being used here, which is exactly what we would expect. So maybe what we saw last time with Assassin's Creed Valhalla was just an anomaly. Clearly, we have 100% GPU utilization in most cases. So the 5800X3D is pairing quite well with the 7800 XT here with little to no issues. And next up, we have Hogwarts Legacy native 1440p on the high preset running around Hogsmeade with the overclocked versus the stock settings here. There is almost no difference here. The power draw is about the same. The temperature is the same. The GPU utilization is the same. The 1% lows are about the same, slightly better every now and again on the overclock, but mostly about the same. The average frame rate's about the same. The active frame rate's about the same. I actually almost threw out this footage. I thought maybe I mixed up the footage or something because this footage is so similar to one another. But if you look at my camera movements and how I'm walking around and moving and all of that stuff is clearly not the same. I double checked the files and everything I could double check, I double checked. This is exactly what happened. I put on an overclock, popped in Hogwarts Legacy and basically saw no difference whatsoever. Of course, Hogwarts Legacy has been known to be a problematic game from an optimization standpoint. You can see that the frame time graph is ever so slightly better at times with the overclock, but more or less it's about the same. Next up, we have Horizon Zero Dawn. I ran the in-game benchmark, native 1440p, and it is on the ultimate quality preset. I know it says ultra, but it is the ultimate quality preset. That's what it's called inside the game. And as you can see, the overclock is basically leading to better 1% lows across the board. Sometimes the gap is very small, like 5 to 6 FPS, and other times it's a little bit larger than that. But overall, the main difference here, the main benefit is that you are getting better 1% lows with the overclock. Outside of that, the frame time graph is about the same. The average frame rate's about the same. The active frame rate's about the same. Now, at times in this benchmark, it does look like that the overclock is once again drawing in less power than the stock settings. But then at other times, you can see where it's basically neck and neck with stock settings. So it completely depends on which part of the benchmark you're watching at the time. But thanks to the fan curve, once again, the thermals are better with the overclock here, or with the overclock settings at least. Basically, other than 1% lows, Horizon Zero Dawn really doesn't benefit from an overclock from what I can see. And next up, we have Halo Infinite, native 1440p on the Ultra preset, stock settings versus an overclock. As you can see, the overclock settings are giving us better results across the board. We have better 1% lows, a better average frame rate, and a better active frame rate in most situations. Obviously, these are not the exact same match, and I couldn't do a like for like comparison exactly. There are going to be fluctuations in a dynamic multiplayer game, like any first-person shooter for that matter. But overall, as you can see, the overclock settings definitely benefit Halo Infinite at native 1440p on the Ultra preset, and I can definitely recommend it. Oh, it's also worth pointing out that the custom fan curve here really didn't do anything extra for the thermals because the temperatures are about the same, whether if it's stock or overclocked. Actually, the overclock settings seem to be about 1 to 2 degrees hotter. Before we look at the undervolting benchmarks, I do want to showcase a little bit of ray tracing with the 7800 XT. So here we have 1440p on the high preset using FSR quality. Ray tracing is turned on, and where you can make changes like high, medium, or whatever on the ray tracing settings, I have it set to medium settings. This does not include path tracing or anything like that. But as you can see, even with FSR quality, the 7800 XT is struggling with ray tracing. And that is because AMD always seems to struggle with ray tracing. They are typically about a generation behind NVIDIA. And unfortunately, the 6800 XT is about on par with the 7800 XT in ray tracing. And I showcased that in my previous video talking about the 7800 XT. Next up, we have Hogwarts Legacy, native 1440p with the high settings on and ray tracing reflections on only, no other form of ray tracing. And there is also no upscaling here. The footage does look quite nice, and the average frame rate is around 84 FPS, give or take. The 1% lows are at 47 FPS, which is definitely bad, but at least in this game, in Hogwarts Legacy, it is playable with ray tracing turned on. And finally, for our ray tracing benchmarks, we have Spider-Man Remastered running at native 1440p on the very high preset, and the ray tracing settings are set to very high, and the object range detail is set to the default of 6. And as you can see, our average frame rate is about 77 to 78 FPS. Again, 1% lows are down in the 40s, which is definitely less than ideal, but this is playable. And Spider-Man Remastered is definitely one of the more well-rounded, optimized games on PC. Nixies did a phenomenal job with this game, importing it to the PC and continuing to update it and patch it. And so overall, this game is definitely well optimized, and you can absolutely play this game with ray tracing on a 7800 XT at 1440p. Just know your 1% lows are pretty bad here. And now we're back to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, native 1440p on the Ultra preset. I ran the in-game benchmark, and this time we are now looking at undervolted settings versus stock settings. And as you can see, we are already pulling in significantly less wattage, and our 1% lows are a little bit better with the undervolt settings, and our average frame rate is a little bit higher than our stock settings, and our active frame rate is also definitely higher here for the most part, and we're still getting 100% GPU utilization, and our overall temperatures are definitely lower. So undervolting is definitely way better than stock settings. I would definitely recommend doing this. Now we have Cyberpunk 2077, native 1440p on the high preset, no ray tracing, no upscaling, running the in-game benchmark, the undervolted settings versus the stock settings here. And this time, unfortunately, the uplift is not quite as noticeable. Yeah, the 1% lows do see a small improvement here, but the average frame rate isn't as much of an uplift, but you do have better temperatures and you do have less power draw, so that is still a win. So even in Cyberpunk 2077, even if you don't get a real performance uplift, you're still getting the same performance, no less, and you're still receiving better thermals with less power draw. So I still recommend using an undervolt even in Cyberpunk. Now we have Horizon Zero Dawn native 1440p with the ultimate quality preset. I ran the in-game benchmark, and our undervolt settings here are only giving us a marginal performance uplift. I mean, more performance is still more performance, but once again, it's not as big of an uplift as you would want to see, but a very similar situation here to Cyberpunk. We are pulling in noticeably less power, and our thermals are better, and our performance has not gone down at all. In fact, it has actually increased, even if it is just by a small portion. So yes, I still recommend an undervolt even in Horizon Zero Dawn. And now for the $1,000,000 question: should you run an overclock or an undervolt on the 7800 XT? Here we have the in-game benchmark for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, native 1440p on the Ultra preset. Our 1% lows are better with the undervolt settings. Our average frame rate is better with the undervolt settings. Our power draw is significantly less with the undervolt settings. Now, our thermals are reporting worse here for the undervolt, but that is because the fan curve here is the stock fan curve. Unfortunately, I completely forgot to apply the same fan curve whenever I decided to do the comparison between the overclock settings and the undervolt settings. It is safe to say that if you apply the same fan curve to the undervolt settings, your thermals would at least be the same, but probably even better given the fact that we are pulling in noticeably less power. And once again, overclock settings versus the undervolted settings, native 1440p on the high preset in Cyberpunk running the in-game benchmark. Our 1% lows are about the same. Our average frame rate is about the same. Our active frame rate is about the same. So there's not much of an actual performance uplift in Cyberpunk, unfortunately, whether if you're running an undervolt or an overclock, but you can pull in significantly less power by undervolting it and still get the same performance, give or take. So even in Cyberpunk, I would recommend an undervolt over an overclock. And for our final test, we have Horizon Zero Dawn, native 1440p on the ultimate quality preset with the in-game benchmark. Our 1% lows are about the same, give or take, between the two settings. They're technically a little bit better with the overclock by 1 or 2 FPS, but our average frame rate is actually better with the undervolt, and the active frame rate also seems to be just a little bit higher with the undervolt. And of course, the undervolt is also pulling in less power. And again, the thermals are in favor of the overclock here, but that is because of the aggressive fan curve I put on it when I was overclocking it. And I did forget to apply the same like-for-like settings on the fan curve to the undervolt. And so I do apologize for that. But I still think there is enough data here to show that when you apply an undervolt on the 7800 XT, not only can you get performance gains in general, but you can also have a much more efficient card all the way around. And so I still recommend an undervolt in basically every game here when compared to stock settings or the overclock settings. And now for my final thoughts on the 7800 XT. Overall, it is a rock solid GPU at $500. You can't really complain about the price. You are getting a lot of performance for $500. The card out of the box is really decent by itself. I would definitely recommend, if you do nothing else, at least apply a custom fan curve to it to help out with those temperatures. But outside of that, it is a rock solid performer. But if you're willing to get your hands a little bit dirty, then I could definitely recommend that you can look into overclocking or undervolting. Both of those options give this card way better performance, and it doesn't cost you anything but just a little bit of time, so why not? And of the two options, overclocking versus undervolting, I can honestly say that I do think undervolting is a better path for gaming. Now, obviously, if you're an extreme overclocker and you like to go for time spy scores and things of that nature, then you probably don't want less power. You probably want more. So you should probably go after the overclock. But for gamers, I would definitely recommend going for the undervolt. Now, in summary, I will say this. If you go back and you look at my pros and cons video of the 7800 XT versus the 6800 XT, you will see where I talked about being confused around the excitement for the 7800 XT because it's not exactly a generational leap over the 6800 XT. It's basically a better version of the 6800 XT. And there's two ways of looking at it. One way you can say, hey, well, if somebody took a really good product, made it a little bit cheaper and a little bit better and put it back out there, how can you call that a bad thing? Okay, fair, completely fair. At the same time though, if you already have a 6800 XT and you're coming up on about 3 years of having it and you've been eagerly waiting for an upgrade, Unfortunately, the 7800 XT is not for you, and it's not something you can really get excited for because it's basically all the same gaming power you already have, all the VRAM you already have. It's just more power efficient, and it has an AV1 encoder. And that's really about it in terms of, overall real benefits over a 6800 XT. And of course, the launch MSRP is cheaper than what the 6800 XT was, but that doesn't really matter to people who already own a 6800 XT, right? So, I mean, that's only good for new buyers to the market. So anyway, with that being said though, the 7800 XT overclocks well, it undervolts well, it gives you a lot of variety of different things you can do. It's a great card at a fair price, and I can recommend it. Now, if I can make one more recommendation, I would simply say this video is going live in October of 2023. Try and wait until mid-November at least of 2023. The holiday season is coming. Black Friday is coming. AMD is known for price cuts and game bundles. If you wait, you can probably get the card for either less than the $500 MSRP, or if you do pay the $500 MSRP, which is a fair price, you might be able to get a free game with it. Now, I don't know if that's worth it to you or not. You have to make that determination, but that would be my recommendation. Wait if you can wait. But overall, it's a good card and I do recommend it. Thank you again to RK Benchmarker for sending me the card for review and then signing up to be a Patreon member. That is incredibly awesome, man. Thank you so much. That's it for today's video. If you liked it, do me a favor, hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new, get subscribed and consider getting Discord access for $1 and a 7-day free trial linked down below. And until next time, you rock out.